Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Revolution. We are going to be doing part 2 of Paul Tillich's You Are Accepted today. It's been a wild week. Had a lot of strange conversations with people online. I think we're all a bit stressed out. So let's try to be kinder to one another if at all possible. I think that would be helpful. Just be a little bit patient, you know. I think the political landscape has got everybody a little bit nuts right now, to be honest with you. Also, my daughter turned 7 this week, so we really had a lot of birthday fun this week. So I've been having fun with my kids. That's always a blessing. Here, I'm going to move up my mic a little bit. Always want to make sure the audio is good for Josh in his editing. So today we're going to do this. Hey, I want to remind you, though, that we're talking about Paul Tillich, of course. Paul Tillich was the first non-Jewish professor to be kicked out of Germany by the Nazis. Tillich uses some very particular words. Really good introduction to Paul Tillich, and he talks about the ground of being as God is this book, My Search for Absolutes by Paul Tillich. Hopefully you can see that. I've got my phone is on some sort of cinema mode, but I hope you can see that and check that out. It's really a good book. And the book we are reading from today is right here. The Shaking of the Foundations by, here I'm in front of my face, by Paul Tillich. And the sermon is You Are Accepted. You can find You Are Accepted by just going onto Google and putting in You Are Accepted, Paul Tillich, and it'll come right up. Or you can listen to it here on YouTube. My friend Pete Rollins read it for us in his lovely Northern Irish accent, so you can hear that there. Or you can hear that on any of our podcasts like Spotify or iTunes or wherever you podcast. I have to remember to name all these books because I forget sometimes we're doing a podcast as well. So, I don't want to just be like, and there's this one, and then no one knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, so we're going to hit part 2, some really incredible stuff. I think it's this Tillich's talk, which is probably written... this copy of my book, it was from this person here in this was their copy in 1963. But I'm trying to remember when this book was written. I think it was in the late 40s, maybe early 50s. And these are from talks that Paul Tillich gave at United Theological Seminary at their chapel services. So welcome to part 2. If you did not hear part 1 of You Are Accepted, that's everywhere now. You can watch it here on YouTube, or you can listen to it on Spotify or iTunes or other podcast places, which I'm not sure what the other podcast places are, but I'm sure they're there because we're always saying wherever you podcast. So I'm guessing there's lots of different podcast choices out there. So whichever you choose, we are more than likely there. Just trying to remember where we left off. So we left off last week. Yeah, here we are. So we're just going to jump into this talk and kind of look and try to take a deeper look into Tillich's talk of You Are Accepted. It's great on its own. But I think it's worthy of having a deeper dive into it. So let's start here. Who has not at some time been lonely in the midst of a social event? As an introvert, I have been lonely in the middle of a social event many, many times. The feeling of our separation from the rest of life is most acute when we are surrounded by it in the noise and talk. We realize then much more than in the moment of solitude. How strange we are to each other. How estranged life is from life. Each one of us draws back into himself. We cannot penetrate the hidden center of another individual, nor can that individual pass beyond the shroud that covers our own being. Even the greatest love cannot break through the walls of the self. I think we've all been there. Who has not experienced the disillusionment of all great love? I think even in friendship we sometimes realize that, when we change or we grow or we're just not who we thought each other were. Who has not experienced that disillusionment of all great love? If one were to hurl away his self in complete self-surrender, he would become a nothing, without a form or strength, a self without a self, merely an object of contempt and abuse. Our generation knows more than the generation of our fathers about the hidden hostility in the ground of our souls. Now that we've gotten to where we're at with social media, we all know even more of the hostility. Today, I know much about the profusive aggressiveness in every being. Today, we can confirm what Immanuel Kant, the prophet of human reason and dignity, was honest enough to say. There is something in the misfortune of our best friends which does not displease us. So even when we see people we love and care, when they, we're not like, sometimes we, what was it Morrissey said? We hate it when our friends become successful. Who among us is dishonest enough to deny that this is true also of them? Are we not almost always ready to abuse everybody and everything, although often in a very refined way? I'm going to abuse you, but in a very refined way. It reminds me, like when I lived in Minnesota, Minnesota nice sometimes was considered like being passive aggressive, which I found pretty hilarious. Like, oh, what an interesting hat you have on there, Mr. Baker. And, they're like saying like, that's an ugly hat. But it was very refined. And we see this quite a bit in the world today of hurting each other in a very refined way. Maybe it's through identity politics or pointing out one's privilege or one's lack of privilege or where one is from or, one's politics or religion or such. Although often in a very refined way, for the pleasure of self-elevation, for an occasion for boasting, for a moment of lust. Like we lust to self-elevate ourselves. And I think we see this a lot with the political realm. We're always othering people. And then we're saying, oh, well, you're really bad because you don't realize this is the suffering you're going to cause. And I would never do that. Often sometimes we don't realize is that when we're condemning others or we're judging others, in some ways we're also lifting ourselves up, being like, well, see, and like me, who's a really good person, would never vote that way or would never think that way or would never believe in that type of theology. And so we kind of elevate ourselves up. And I think we see this a lot with, people on the right and on the left, like especially influencers on both of those sides, where they're also just kind of, can you believe this? Can you believe what they're doing? Or all the evangelicals are idiots, or all those progressives are just wishy-washy. It's like if you're elevating yourself and saying, like, I have the truth, so please listen to me. And it keeps us divided. People really make a career out of causing division and lifting themselves up and elevating themselves and maybe elevating their tribe. And so we often buy into these things because we watch them and they go, oh, this is affirming everything I believe, and all those people I don't like, it's making them less than, and it's building me up to be better than them. And I think if we're going to be people who follow the concepts and the religion of Christianity, that's not how we're supposed to operate. But it's really easy to fall into. I mean, that's when we went through the book of Galatians. I mean, that's almost what the whole thing is about, is everybody's playing the divided issue and who's better than who. and elevating each other up and by making others less than, and it's causing this horrible separation where obviously Apostle Paul says, hey, if you guys continue to do this, you are going to destroy each other. And I think that's what we really have to be careful about. And I think that's what Tillich's talking about in here. And ironically, this is probably one of the best sermons written about grace I've ever read, and I would put it up there with Galatians. All right, let's continue to jump into this thing. So we get these lustful moments to elevate ourselves, to look better than everyone else. And I think that's low fruit, to be honest with you. To know that we are ready is to know the meaning of separation of life from life. And it is sin abounding. So, Tillich is saying, like, for Tillich, the concept of sin is just separation. And so to know that we are ready is to know the meaning of a separation. So we're separating, and we're separate like never before. We're like, well, my tribe thinks this way, or my group thinks this way, or my politics are this. I don't know. We have a lot of different ways to separate ourselves. You name it. He says it here. The most irrevocable expression of the separation life from life today is the attitude of social groups within nations towards each other. So you think about all the different social groups and the social justice, and we're constantly divided from each other, and to the point where we can't even have conversations and that are tough, or where we can't have conversations without belittling the other person. And I think that's where it's dangerous. I always get these, sometimes not always, it's too much of a broad stroke there, but often I get, I'll say something about like, hey, we should be, I shared a piece of art that was, this artist did in Atlanta. It was like, and if your religion lacks unity, maybe you need to look for another religion. It's just a silly little thing that I put up. But people are like, are you saying that we need to be united with people who hate us and want to? And I'm like, okay, first of all, if you know any of my work, you know that that's not what I'm saying. But it's just we jump to the worst case scenario, to the most extreme. To to completely separate ourselves from the other, completely separate ourselves from that, and also for us to not have any responsibility within creating a peaceful thing, or doing this, or having tough conversations. So we don't even want to argue with people. We don't even want to be friends with people. And I'm not saying that you can't have boundaries with others. I don't think that's what anybody's. We should have boundaries. There are people that might be hurtful in your life. But the hope is other people are in their lives. That's the concept. You do have to have self-care so you can help others. And if someone's draining all of that from you, you might not be able to help others. I get that situation. But often we don't even, it's not even about individuals. It's just like tribal politics. It's just, you got to believe this, you got to think this, you got to be progressive, you've got to be conservative, you've got to be religious, you've got to be atheist, you've got to be this or that. And if you're not all in, then you're not part of my life. You're separate, and we can't have a conversation. And the problem with that is that we become free from conflict. We are conflict avoidant. And the problem is when we become conflict avoidant, then usually when conflict does come, we just come straight to war and straight to tearing each other apart and questioning each other's integrity. And we get really angry, which we see so much on social media. We see so much on YouTube. We see so much all over the place. Rather than having tough conversations and I'm going to respect this person and I can be their friend even if we don't agree. And sometimes, like people in my line of work, we're like, I'm going to have tough conversations even if I strongly disagree with a human being, and they don't recognize my right to believe what I believe or the rights of my friends to be alive, with the hope that I can help them see that they are victims of misinformation. That the hope that maybe they can see something in a different light. But if no one's having these conversations, then people aren't growing and people aren't changing. And I never grew from people making fun of me or telling me that I was horrible, or someone elevating themselves above me and going like, you're wrong. And I'm like, oh, you're right, I'm wrong. I should read this book. Maybe I did when I was, a teenager at church, and I thought, I was threatened with hell, and that was the great motivator. But I don't think that's a productive or healthy way to motivate people or to help anyone. So there's that. Right? So the most irrevocable expression of the separation of life from life today is the attitude of social groups. Listen to this. This is like head on, and we're talking about something that's like written in the late 40s, early 50s. Within nations towards each other, and the attitude of nations themselves towards other nations, which we're seeing in the media, like nations that will refuse to recognize each other's humanity. I mean, I don't know if there becomes any more separation where you just don't say, like, you don't even have a right to exist, you know. And unfortunately, sometimes people who have these extreme feelings really are the people who get attention and are the people that hurt and get everybody riled up. And then we all allow that to think the worst case scenario with each other. And I think we have to be really careful to guard our hearts and guard our minds from that type of thing where we just jump to the worst conclusion of being like, well, I know this person has always been on my side, but they've just shown some chink in their armor, or they're just showing that they love these people, and even though they disagree with them, so they must now be all that. You know, we just have to be careful because that's just more separation. It's like separation after separation. Separation begets separation, which Tillich felt was truly what sin was. In the attitude of social groups within nations towards each other, the attitudes of nations themselves towards other nations. We see this in war constantly. The walls of distance and time and space have been removed by technical progress. And here he's talking about telephones, you know, and mail. Now we just turn on and we can talk to almost anybody, anywhere, and anytime. You know, our magic pocket computer. The walls of distance and time and space have been removed by technical progress, but the walls of estrangement between heart and heart have been incredibly strengthened. And it's true, the more that we're able to connect, the more we become estranged to one another. I mean, I just remotely asking people to be tolerant of each other and be kind with each other. I've had people who I've known my whole life get angry at me and tell me that, oh, I'm wrong, and then they should, you know, and it's these extremes, you know, and it's this constant, like, no, we have to be estranged. No, I have to be estranged from that person. I can't talk to that person. I can't do that. And I get it. I mean, there are people who frustrate me and drive me wild and drive me nuts, and I have to keep out of my life. And there's other people I want in my life, and then when I get them in my life, I end up talking too much or arguing way too much. Like when me and my dad talk, it's like, it's kind of can be like a car wreck sometimes, and it's really frustrating. But for me, it's like, at least we're talking. Like, at least it's not complete estrangement. You know, at least we're arguing, and maybe not even well, but at least we're conversating, and I get to tell them about my kids. But even with all this technology, our heart-to-heart estrangement is more clear. And our hearts have become incredibly... the estrangement between heart and heart have become incredibly strengthened. You know, so the more we become connected, like I said, the more estranged we are. Our motives, we're always questioning each other's always motives. It seems like we're all very suspicious of one another. And I just, it's sad that this has happened. And, you know, and almost you see like a lot of these influencers online, especially a lot of like the religious influencers I see online, it's like they're encouraging us to be estranged. Like they're encouraging us to be like, that group's bad and this group's good, and you know, goodies and baddies and black and white thinking, and you know, two options and that's all there is, you know. And it's like, wow, we're all very simplistic thinkers, you know. When did we start to think like, you know, we're reading comic books and treating each other this way? Like, when did we lose nuance? All right, anyway, I digress. The madness of the German Nazis and the cruelty of the lynching mobs in the South provide too easy of an excuse for us to turn our thoughts from our own selves. But let us just consider ourselves of what we feel when we read the morning and tonight that in some sections of Europe, all children under the age of 3 are sick and are dying, or that in some sections of Asia, millions without homes are freezing and starving to death, you know, and everything we're seeing on the news today and people's all over. I mean, just the wars that we're not even talking about. The strangeness of life to life is evident in these strange facts that we can know all of this and yet can live today, this morning, tonight, as though we are completely ignorant. And I refer to the most sensitive people among us. In both mankind and nature, life is separated from life. Estrangement prevails among things that live. Sin abounds. I remember when in September 11th, I came into work and I always listened to my CD player. I'm that old. And I didn't listen to the radio, so I had no idea what was going on. And I got into work and the person who worked at the front desk said, "Did you hear what happened? Oh my gosh, we're under attack." Their explanation was even worse than what was happening, and what was happening was really horrific. And so I ran into my office and I listened, and it freaked me out so bad that I drove home. I drove home. And then I got a call from my office saying, "Where are you? Why aren't you here?" And I said, "I'm sorry. I just got kind of freaked out by everything that's happened. And I just wanted to go home and think about this, And I called my wife at the time and I was like, "What's going on?" She's like, "I'm at work. I got to be at work." And it was just like, I was so like, how are we all just acting like normal, like normally going on? I'm not saying that this makes me better than anybody else. Definitely wasn't in the eyes of my employer at the time. But it was just one of those things where it was like, I wasn't estranged enough at that moment, and so we're almost trained through school and through work and through these things to even be more estranged of like, it doesn't matter what's happening over there, or who's killing who and what's going, we're going to be estranged. And that's obviously how estranged we are from each other. So to think about that and think about that in our own lives, not project that onto others, but think about that on our own lives when we're having tough conversations and we already know that we're estranged from that type of stuff. So maybe those mean-spirited things that we have to say towards others and all that stuff that we're angry about and we unleash on other people might be because of our estrangement. And honestly, that type of connection can be very hurtful and very off-putting. And I hope we really, honestly, I'm going to say it again, I really hope we can show a little bit more kindness to one another and a little bit more patience with one another. I think everybody's having a rough time. Everybody's groceries are really expensive right now. Everybody's struggling for rent. Everybody almost I know is one paycheck away from being homeless. I mean, life is tough for everybody, not to mention everything that's happening within politics and all the propaganda from both sides. Sorry, everybody. I'm not a moderate. I'm very leftist, but I'm just going to tell you how I feel about that. So I'm not sorry if I'm going to tell you. So for Tillich, this estrangement is what he feels is really what sin is that we're estranged from others' suffering. It is important to remember that we are not merely separated from each other, and this is where it gets really deep and it goes into psychology, for we are also separated from ourselves. Man against himself is not merely the title of a book, but rather also indicates the rediscovery of an age-old insight. Man is split within himself, which is a psychological fact. Life moves against itself through aggression, hate, and despair. We are want to condemn self-love, but we really mean to condemn is contrary to self-love. I don't know. I think this was the printing error in here. What he's saying is what we really mean is to condemn is contrary to self-love when we condemn certain things. It is that mixture of selfishness and self-hate that permanently pursue us, that prevents us from loving others, that prohibits us from loving ourselves, and the love with which we are loved eternally. He who is able to love himself is able to love others. He who has learned to overcome self-contempt has overcome his contempt for others. Now, this is very important because what Tillich is explaining right here is grace. This is the concept of grace. This is the concept of saying you are accepted. When you realize that you are accepted, it's much easier to realize that others are accepted as well. So often when we go around, we go like, you're wrong and you're bad and they're wrong and they're this. Often we do protest too much. It's often us projecting our feelings of not being accepted, our feelings of not feeling like we fit in. And so we are projecting that onto others in ways to cope with it. And it's really just a bad coping mechanism of continuing to separate ourselves from others and condemn others for the very things that we feel about ourselves. And so that's why grace is really a valuable thing. And that's why we've talked about grace for 30 years at Revolution, is because self-acceptance helps us to love each other more. That it brings a whole new light to love your neighbor as yourself, if you think about it, because that is grace. So remember that, like, the next time you're listening to a cultural critic or someone who's angry from the right or angry on the left, are they, maybe there's something within themselves that they're struggling with, and that will also allow you, if you have grace, to give a little bit more grace to that person and maybe look at it in that way. Now, I will tell you this, if you go to tell them that, well, you're just projecting in that's not always the best way to go either. It's usually, that's a slow road to get to that point. A little patience required, a little fruit of the Spirit there. Goes on to say, but the depth of our separation lies in just the fact that we are not capable of great and merciful divine love towards ourselves. And when I think about divine love, I think of like Corinthians 4-7, that concept of like love never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always hopeful, endures through every circumstance. It doesn't demand its own way. It keeps no records of wrongs. All these 1 Corinthians 4-7 ideas. And we're just not possible at giving that love to ourselves. Like, we're always going, I should have done that, or I could have done that better, or, I have all these expectations and I'm not meeting up to anybody's expectations. I mean, I'm 48 and finally feeling like I have some sort of self-acceptance of who I am and caring about myself for who I am and being me and realizing, like, I gotta be me. Like, my mom wrote a book called that. And being, like, all right, well, this is Jay, sorry, but it's taken me 40 some odd years to get there and to be comfortable in my own skin. And still, by no means am I an expert at that. Sometimes when people disagree with me, I automatically go into this, either like, I've got to be right or I've got to make it right. We've got to come to an agreement. Sometimes it's a compulsion. It's not just being peacemaker, but it's a compulsion to be a peacemaker. And I have to make sure that I keep that in check as well. On the contrary, in each of us, there is an instinct of self-destruction, which is as strong as our instincts of self-preservation. Freud talks a lot about that, the death drive. And our tendency to abuse and destroy others, there is an open or hidden tendency to abuse and destroy ourselves. Now, this one I put a big, giant orange star next to for a reason, what I'm about to read to you, and highlighted it in orange, and then put a green mark next to it, so it's obviously beckoning for me to read it to you. Cruelty towards others is always also cruelty towards ourselves. Now listen to that. So when we get really angry and we get on our soapbox and we become cruel to the other, when we want to dehumanize someone, or we want to put them into, say, well, you're just this tribe, or you're just this sexuality, or you're just this race, or you're just this, like race, these type of things. We're going to put them in their place and say, well, we're just going to put you in with a group of people rather than seeing you as a human being and an individual with life experiences that are different and unique than everybody else. Like, I think everybody's a snowflake, so there you go. Even conservatives are snowflakes. But what it's saying is cruelty towards others is always cruelty towards ourselves. And so it's good to remember that when we get really angry, is to go, okay, why is this affecting me? One of those things helped me was similar to that, was with panic attacks. Years ago, I was having panic attacks like 2 or 3 a day. Taking different medication, seeing therapists. I didn't even know, I wasn't sure how to handle it. But I started to learn coping mechanisms through therapy to do that. One was like, let the panic attack in. Just don't fight it. Don't get scared. Don't try to push it away, because you'll get in this weird thing. So just, all right, panic attack, you want me, you got me. But the other one was that the panic attack is usually connected to something that you haven't dealt with and something that's unsolved in your life or some sort of conflict that you're kind of pushing down or some denial. And so I would just also start to take a look at like, oh, okay, well, where is an area that I'm feeling uncertain about or really insecure about and not feeling, and it helped me like, okay, this is why I'm panicking because I've got this unresolved issue over here, like that I've pushed down over here and that I didn't even think about, and it's kind of showing up over here. And I think that's similar way as our cruelty towards others can be, is that we've got these issues with ourselves and we're angry at ourselves and we maybe think we can elevate ourselves or feel better by this kind of coping mechanism of being cruel towards someone else, but we're really being cruel towards ourselves. And there's probably something very similar within us that feels that way. I mean, you think about it when we're dehumanizing others, even if we're dehumanizing those or we're dehumanizing others, we're giving them a taste of their own medicine. We're going, oh, have a taste of your own medicine. Those who fight monsters need to be careful that they do not become monsters. And so often when we're fighting monsters, we're actually just fighting the monster within ourselves. And so that's something really important to think about, in life. You don't have to be a Christian to think about it, just a human being who wants to live in life. I mean, that's psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but that is psychology. That's Jung talks about it, and Freud talks about it, and a lot of different psychologists would tell you this is the truth. So remember, I'm going to read it one more time. Cruelty towards others is always cruelty towards ourselves. Nothing is more obvious than the split in both our unconscious life and our conscious personality. Without the help of modern psychology, Paul, the apostle, expressed the fact in his famous words, which is also in Romans, "For I do not do the good I desire, but rather the evil that I do not desire." And it's wild and it's not wild that Tillich brings it up here because he knew this, but some psychologists often said that Paul was kind of the forerunner of understanding the unconscious because of this verse, which is really interesting. But Paul expressed the fact in his famous words, "For I do not do the good I desire, but rather the evil that I do not desire." And then he continued the words that might as well be the motto of all depth psychology. "Now, if I should do what I do not wish to do, is it not I that do it, but rather the sin which dwells within me?" The apostle sensed a split between his conscious will and his real will, between himself and something strange, with an alien to him. He was estranged from himself, and that estrangement he called sin. He has also called it strange law that is in his limbs, an irresistible compulsion. How often we commit certain acts in perfect consciousness, yet with the shocking sense that we are being controlled by an alien power. That is the experience that is of separation of ourselves from ourselves, which is to say sin, whether or not we like to use that word. For example, I don't usually eat a lot of French fries and sauces and things like that, but during my daughter's birthday, we went to Red Robin's and it was all you can eat French fries, and there was ranch dressing, and I was eating all the French fries, and when all the French fries were gone, I was finding my kids' vegetables and dipping it in the ranch dressing, and I was like, "Oh, you shouldn't be eating this," but I was like, "Oh, it's so good, I know, I love it," and I was in this conflict, but whatever was inside me saying like, "This feels good," was winning. That's just a tiny example, but a little bit more I think we could all relate to. That is the experience of the separation of ourselves from ourselves, which is to say sin, whether or not we like to use that word. So Tillich was very aware that even people in the seminary, in United Seminary in New York, were not so comfortable with that word, sin. As a lot of us, because it's a trigger word and it's been so abused in our lives, and everything was called, I mean, if you grew up in evangelicalness or Assemblies of God, I mean, and the Assemblies of God, like, we had women speakers, we had all these other things, but everything was a sin, and everything was like, it would cost you your salvation. Like, you weren't once saved, always saved like the Baptists. This was like, you better hold tightly and you better hope it doesn't seep through your fingers, So sin can be like, you kind of have to learn to redefine sin in your life. and not let it be that word. And that's why these tough conversations are important, because when you say something, like when you say sin, someone might think separation, or someone might think like rated R movie, or I smoked a cigarette behind the church, just silly things, so it's important to, sometimes we're not even communicating with each other. We're so separated by just even what we mean and think about words. Sometimes our words are just triggering people and we don't even realize it. And I'm sure I do that quite a bit when I talk about bringing people together. People are like, why? Thus, the state of our whole life is estranged from others and ourselves, because we are estranged from the ground of being, because we are estranged from the origin and aim of our life. And we do not know where we have come from or where we are going. We are separated from the mysteries and the depths of greatness of our existence. We hear a voice in the depth, but our ears are closed. We feel that something radical, totally and unconditioned is demanded of us, but we rebel against it. And we try to escape this urgency and will not accept its promise. And I'll tell you what, grace is pretty amazing when you do accept it, that promise. But you end up doing stuff like me and preaching unpopular messages about grace is anarchy and it's for everybody, and there's no asterisk, and everybody really does want to give it an asterisk. Everybody does want to separate grace from some group of people, unfortunately. And that's often a weapon. We cannot escape, however, if that something is the ground of our being, which is Tillich's word for God. If you need a deeper meaning on that, you can check out my search for absolutes. Paul Tillich, he gives a really great explanation of the ground of being, which I did read in the last talk. So if you haven't heard that talk yet, you might want to go back and listen to that one as well. It tries to escape its urgency, will not accept its promise. We cannot escape, however, if it's something is the ground of our being. We are bound to it for all eternity. Just as we are bound to ourselves and to all other life, we always remain in the power of that from which we are estranged. We always remain in the power of that which we are estranged. So sometimes that's why when we contact with people who have different belief systems than ours and different convictions than ours, or just different little nuances, they have power over us because we're estranged from it and we're scared. The unknown. What if they do this? What if they pass this law? What if that happens? What if And so it holds this power on us. And sometimes those fears are legitimate, and sometimes those two fears, I find, usually are not. They're just people trying to keep us in line, as politicians and governments and billionaires like to try to do. The fact brings us to the ultimate depth of sin, separated and yet bound, estranged and yet belonging, destroyed and yet preserved, the state which is called despair. Now listen to this. Despair means that there is no escape. Despair is the sickness unto death. But the terrible thing about the sickness of despair is that we cannot be released, not even through open or hidden suicide, for we all know that we are bound eternally incapable to the ground of our being. The abyss of separation is not always visible, but it has become more visible to our generation than to preceding generations because of our feelings of meaninglessness, emptiness, doubt, and cynicism, all expressions of despair, of our separation from the root and the meaning of our life. Sin, in the most profound sense, sin is despair, abounds amongst us. So this despair, when I think about this, I think people who make a living out of being cynical and about tearing other people apart and about judging other people they don't understand, and by not being open to any type of differences or nuances. And they sell this despair that keeps us separate. Well, it's popular. People go, oh, I feel that, I recognize it, I see it, I like it, affirm it. I can be comfortable, in my despair by you telling me to be despaired and by being cynical and to have all this doubt and emptiness in my life. I honestly, I felt more despair as the more online presence I have. The more time I spend online, the more despair I feel that comes about me. So I really have to watch that I spend more time, trying to spend more time in books than being online all the time, because I feel it everywhere. But despair, unfortunately, is good for business. But I think it's important to realize that despair, let's read that again. The abyss of separation is not always visible, but it has become more visible to our generation. You think about it even now more to this generation. I mean, he's talking about pre-baby boomers, when baby boomers were being born. The more visible to our generation than to the preceding generations, because of our feelings of meaningless, emptiness, doubt, and cynicism, all expressions of despair. So we don't realize is that a lot of these people who are promoting and being cynicism, they're in despair. They're feeling pain. They're in this despair. All expressions of despair are separation from the roots of the meaning of our life. Sin in its most profound sense, sin as despair abounds amongst us. All right, so that's kind of sounds hopeless, but we're going to leave on a high note, because the whole point with this verse was on the Romans verse where it says, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. So, where sins abounds, Tillich says, grace did much more abound, says Paul in the same letter in which he describes the unmanageable power of separation and self-destruction within society and the individual soul. He does not say these words because of sentimental interest, demand a happy ending for everything tragic. People will say, oh, unity and it's sentimentality. Grace, that's just a bunch of sentimentality. We'll never work together. But then you look at like Northern Ireland and their 30-year civil war, and that they found peace. I mean, they might not be like holding hands singing Kumbaya, but they found peace to the Civil War. They found, through hard work and through patience and through people like John Hume, they were able to come to a conclusion. They were able to compromise with one another. The big scary compromise where they were able to say, like, everybody has to play a part. It has to be a diverse group of people. It has to be Catholics and it has to be Protestants and it has to be everything in between, because everybody is part of this community. And that's going to be a very hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because we think goodies and baddies. And if you're thinking goodies and baddies, like good sides and bad sides, you're going to think, well, there's no room for bad people. Maybe you have to start redefining how you see people who think differently than you, and ask yourself, do I really believe in diversity? Or do I just believe in like a rainbow color and people can't have different thoughts than me? Am I really just closed off to being, separated from anybody who doesn't think and talk and walk like me? I mean, what is that? That's scary. So he doesn't say that grace abounds more and takes us out of this despair because he's trying to be sentimental. And I get accused of it all the time. When I talk to people, I talk to other ministers, I talk to other theologians and people like that, and I talk to these people online who are like influencers and stuff, and they go, oh, you're just being sentimental. Oh, I want to see those people destroyed. Oh, I want to see those people. I don't care who I hurt. And it's shocking when you hear that from people who are like, have like their like pronouns in there, because you're like, oh, I thought you guys were progressive and every progressive wanted peace, and it's just not true. I mean, conservatives are the same way. This thing, grace is just sentiment, or grace is just for this, or grace is just for that. But we've already covered that. If you didn't hear the first talk, please listen to that, and please read this whole talk on Google, or listen to Peter Allen's reading of it on Revolution on YouTube or on one of our talks. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I always forget to say that. But it's not about sentimentality. It's easy. It's not about a happy ending. He does not say these words because the sentimental interests demand a happy ending for everything tragic. He says them because they describe the most overwhelming and determining experience in his life. Now, this is why I love Paul the Apostle. This is why I think people need to read more Paul. I think Paul has been communicated by so many people, and I wish people would understand Paul more, because I think I would have never thought that God really loved me or accepted me if it wasn't for reading the Apostle Paul. Grace, I would never understood grace being anarchy if it wasn't for the Apostle Paul. Paul really built on the foundation of Christ, and I think he built a building worth looking at. That's why I'm very clear that I don't accept the pastoral epistles. I think they're forgeries and things like that, because I think they're trying to undo that building that Paul was building. They're trying to undo that work on the foundation that he was building. They try to undo that grace and that acceptance and try to bring in more despair. And I'm not a fan of despair either. So he says, so he does not say these words for sentimentality. He says them because they describe the most overwhelming and determining experience of his life. And the picture of Jesus as the Christ, which appeared to him on the moment of his great separation from other men, from himself and God, he found himself accepted in spite of his being rejected. Now let's think about this. Because I love Paul so much, I hear everybody's reasons for not loving Paul. But anyway, Paul's on his way. Here's another reason for you not to like Paul. Paul's on his way to kill some Christians, to imprison Christians. Some people don't think he was going to kill them, but if you know anything about the times and what was going on, Christians were used to light parties by burning them. They were fed to animals and things like that, as Paul was probably as well ended his life in being fed to wild animals, as most likely. But Paul is on his way to persecuting Christians, and he has a vision of Christ saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And he goes, "Who is this, Lord?" And that's the moment that Paul comes to realization that he's loved and he's accepted, and what this message of grace really is. And that even in his moment of destruction, in his lowest moment of getting revenge on his enemies, of causing so much separation and causing so much despair, because he's literally going into a port city where people are trying to flee from him and other persecution. They're trying to flee from prosecution, and he's coming in to persecute them, and he's on his way to do that. So he's causing quite an amount of despair. He has said, "You are loved, you are accepted." That moment is why we have the letters that Paul wrote in the New Testament. That's why Paul becomes important, is because of that moment. In the picture of Jesus as Christ, which appeared to him, that moment of his great separation from other men, from himself and from God, he found himself accepted in spite of his being rejected. You see, in spite, he was rejected. Sin was abounding a lot in that situation, but look how much more grace abounds. And for a lot of us, this wouldn't be a fair ending. For a lot of us, the fair ending would have been like, well, why don't you just stab him in the head with a spear, kill him, make him pay for it. Don't let him write all these New Testament books. How can this be the guy who tells us to, love each other and not destroy each other, when he was literally destroying lives? How can he bring communities together when he was tearing communities apart? But this is what grace does. It doesn't leave you in despair. It doesn't leave you in the past. Your past is not used against you. And we often use that. I mean, we look at us, we'll find like a tweet that somebody wrote like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago and be like, look, this proves they're horrible people. And this picture of Jesus the Christ, which appeared to him in that moment of his great separation from other men, from himself and God, he found himself accepted in spite of his being rejected. And when he found that he was accepted, he was able to accept himself and to be reconciled to others. So as you see, that self-acceptance allowed him to know, I am loved, now I want to love others. Now I can be reconciled to those very people I was an enemy to, those very people I tried to destroy, those very people I hated. Now I want to be in community with. I want to dine with them. I want to defend them. I want to share life with them. And not just them, but I'm going to, and he ends up working with Gentiles who had probably at this time he was not very comfortable being around. So he is himself to be reconciled to others. That moment in which grace struck him and overwhelmed him, he was reunited with that which he belonged and from which he was estranged in utter utter strangeness. Do we know what it means to be struck by grace? So we're going to finish this next week. And Tillich's going to talk about what that is to be struck by grace. He's going to take us even deeper into that, and then we're going to go even deeper into that with commentary. So I really hope you'll check this out. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for listening to all you folks out there on Spotify and on Apple and on iTunes and YouTube. Thank you on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends and share them with your friends and share these talks with your friends. That really helps us keep going. As you know, we really do run on a super minimum budget at Revolution. As you see, probably me raising funds like crazy during like the end of the month or the middle of the month, because that's when our bills are due. We just had to pay like $500 for our domain names and all that stuff just recently. Everything costs something. I am paid to do this, but I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm not paid an extravagant amount. I barely make it. I actually am doing part-time work for my landlord right now, which is helping a bit, and looking for more part-time work as well. So we're still doing that. But yeah, so if you can help support Revolution, I don't want you to pinch your pennies to give to the church. That's not it at all. But if you do have that finances in your life and you get something out of Revolution, or you think it will help other people get something and be more united and come together and have better conversations, have tough conversations, show each other grace, and maybe accept oneself in order to help accept and love others more, you can do financially. That helps finances keep us going, and we need your help. We've been here for 30 years. I hope we're not going anywhere anytime soon, but if you go to revolutionchurch.com, you can make a donation. We are a 501c3. We are a nonprofit, and so you can take a tax deduction off that. I think we need to raise $1,500 in the next week. Not fun. It's not part of my job I enjoy at all, but you guys have really showed up and made this work possible, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And like I said, if we ever become overabundant within finances, I won't be talking about them, and we'll be doing even more stuff with that. But right now we are on a minimum budget and really just barely scraping by every month. So we could really use your support to keep this work going. So if you like this work, and it's like $3 helps, you know what I mean? Like you can give $100, you can give $1 million if you'd like, but even the little bits help. So don't go like, well, I just have this, or, but also pay your rent. Take your kids out to eat, do those things like that first, get your groceries. I don't want a penny pinch. We'd much rather have you than your money. So thank you. And thanks for being with us this week. And we will be finishing You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich next week. I'm really excited about it because it gets really amazing. Actually, the part we're going to go over next week, I put in one of my books years ago because I loved it so much. And it'll be a great ending to that. And if you want to listen to the You Are Accepted read by Peter Rollins, it's on YouTube and on the other channels, wherever you listen to podcasts. And subscribe, and turn on your bell so you know when we pop up on YouTube. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.